Hello, welcome to our show. We are Business Love with Ryan. I am Ryan. Here we focus on what it takes to make your ideas happen and the steps you can follow to make it just a little bit easier. Subscribe to our podcast to join the ongoing conversation about all things startup business related. Find even more content on our YouTube channel, Ryan's Business Class. See the link in our description of this episode. So glad to have you here. Maybe we can learn something together. Enjoy. Hey, hello. Welcome to Business Love with Ryan. I am Ryan. This is our 7th episode, and today we are focusing on the medical industry. We decided on it today, obviously, because we're in coronavirus, and medical is on the forefront of everyone's mind. And it begs us to ask, is there innovations that could be made that would allow us to move into the future without such bottleneck of resources, especially a shortage of beds? I don't understand how that was possible. It seems to me that people have beds at home, and somehow if medical equipment was somehow portable or purchasable on an individual level, for instance, these respirators, then they could be administered at home, and a healthcare professional could come in, perhaps on shifts, and tend to the disabled person, perhaps on a round, perhaps every half hour you could have somebody come in and check on you, and then they go down the street to the next house, and then they go down, and they work in regions. Something like this. It's just off the top of my head right now. But when we were studying this medical industry and trying to brainstorm of different businesses that we could start, different industries that different business models that we could apply to this industry, you can't help but study startups, and you can't help but study, how businesses get going, especially in the medical field, without running across the story of Theranos. Elizabeth Holmes perpetuated one of the greatest frauds in the history of business. Well, that's one truth. In the history of medical business and in recent startup history, the last 30 years has been a very special time period in all of human history for innovation and technological advancement. And in spite of all of that, in spite of thousands and thousands and thousands of serious companies receiving serious funding, this story of Theranos and their $400 million of venture funding, and then the overall $9 billion of valuation that they were able to develop and claim for a while, until it turned out that that the promise of their company and the results that they had claimed and the track record that they, again, claimed to be building, it turned out to be fraudulent. It turns out to be some sleight of hand, almost like a magic trick performed on a real-life stage, an extended real-life stage, over time and in many locations and with some serious people. So we want to get into that today. So pretty much all of our sections, Tech Tuesday, Strategy Now, Business Supermodels, and Profiles of Success, all of them will sort of be focused on her. But I want to get into a little bit of news before we get started, just to bring us back to what's happening right now. There might be some business lessons about it, but it's just to sort of date our podcast, timestamp it. So the most important thing and the biggest piece of news that moved me this week was the antibodies test that's currently starting to be administered in many places. This is not a coronavirus test. It's not a test to see who has it right this minute. But instead, it's a test that can be applied to blood samples that have already been taken from different groups, for instance, pregnant mothers that came into a certain area during a specific period of time. They can test all those blood samples, and they can generally derive an understanding of how much of the population is reflected by this sample group. So, for instance, in California, over 100 pregnant mothers, and pregnant mothers would represent a general sample set of society because it's a natural, life process. So they took the blood of pregnant mothers because they're going to do this anyways, because when you're pregnant, your body is in a changing condition, and so they want to monitor your health as closely as possible, obviously for the baby. And they looked at these samples, and it turns out that something like 2 to 4% of the population within the sample demonstrated that they had coronavirus antibodies.
More than half of the people who were positive had no symptoms whatsoever. Some had symptoms, but they passed, and then there was a few, very small percentage of people that were exhibiting symptoms right now. However, in all of these cases, the coronavirus was not the reason for the visit. It was the pregnancy first. So there was no alarming situation in terms of they showed up at the hospital to get this addressed. It was a secondary result. So then again, in Denmark, they administered antibody test, again from blood samples, and they again got this idea that about 3% of the population has coronavirus antibodies. What that means is that we know exactly how many people have died. We can be sure that of all these deaths, we attribute this specific number, and that's not going to change no matter how many larger number of cases that we identify. So a larger number of cases with a consistent number of deaths implies that the death rate is actually much lower. It's probably not as low as the flu, but it's much closer to the flu than it is to projections of just a couple weeks ago where they were saying 3, 4, 5, 6% of people who get coronavirus will die. Well, that would be a horrible reality and extremely dangerous, but it turns out that we're looking at something like 10% of that or even 5% of that, which is still risky, still dangerous. We still need to take precautions, but of course we can open up the economy again. 3 times more dangerous than the flu is not reason enough to truly risk everyone's life by shutting down the economy. It's like, how about we just turn off your blood to protect you from some problem? Well, you're not going to live very long on the other side. So we have to balance that equation, between safety and general public well-being. Americans are in breadlines right now. So there's people who have never experienced poverty in the same way that are experiencing it right now, and they don't know what to do, and they're panicking. And already we're starting to see social unrest. So there is some risk that, riots could break out, demonstrations. People are already starting to demonstrate. And the question is, as Andrew Cuomo, the governor of New York State, said, all of it's worth it if we can save one life. Well, is that true? What happens when people can't find jobs for a long time? Well, we already know that suicide, addiction, abuse, antisocial behavior will increase significantly as time goes by. We could see public demonstrations in the streets, which could lead to all sorts of violence and damage and just a general loss of productivity, even what productivity we can currently manage to create in this environment. You can imagine if this went on for a year that all of society would evolve to sort of fit the new way so that we wouldn't even start to feel the pain. It might take us a couple years if we had to live this way continuously, but eventually all of those dollars that are currently being invested in projects that can't function right now would be diverted into more remote functions or, on your screen. Money can go into this direction too. So, money would just go into new ways. But the question is, how much is one life worth? Well, it's not worth risking everything. So I want to go into Tech Tuesday, and I want to get back to our topic, which is, how to be successful in the medical industry. And so let's pause right here, and we'll be right back. Yeah, Tech Tuesday, welcome back. I love this section. I love thinking about the cutting edge of technology and how you can make businesses from it. I would probably say that this is one of the most accurate ways to make a plan about what can be successful in the future, is to examine trends and recent innovations, because that's where you can build, or it wouldn't be an innovation. One article I wanted to focus on was sort of a non-successful or yet to be successful. The article said, these engineers just solved the biggest problems with N95 masks. Well, that's not what the article eventually said. They're trying to solve it, but nobody's going to click on the article if it says they're trying to solve it. So it said they did solve it, which is a lie. However, once you read the article, you realize there's John Zhu and Frederick Prinz from Stanford, students, I think, or maybe recent graduates. They really wanted to make a better N95 mask. And so they came up with two ideas about how to do that. And I'm telling you, both of them are prototypes. They don't have anything that's working yet. They haven't solved it. And when you hear the concepts, you're going to realize perhaps they're a little bit further away than they might be expecting. The first method that they wanted to employ was the idea of water splitting. So they want to separate the oxygen from the hydrogen and bring the oxygen up to the mask, and maybe the hydrogen can be disposed of or used in another kind of way. That's not going to happen by these guys. The idea of water splitting would completely change the world in a way like discovering gasoline changed the world. It's not going to be a technology that's used for N95 masks primarily. If you can split, nuclear fission, then you're going to have, these guys would be super billionaires. And so what they wanted to do, they want to apply an electrical current to the water to try to separate the two. Well, this is about as far as the explanation in the article went, and I think it's about as far as it's going to go. Now, the second suggestion they had seems like it's a little bit more plausible, but there again, the materials cost would be very expensive, most likely, because they want to use a membrane that separates negative ions from oxygen. So they take an oxygen-containing anions, which are negatively charged atoms, and then they pass it through a membrane, and they're able to isolate oxygen, which can be focused back into the mask. So what it is it's a box on the waist with a tube that goes up to the mask, and it provides a cleansing and a heightened oxygen content. What was funny about the article, though, is if you go into the comments, the very first and most popular comment of all was by a guy named Nicholas, and he says, "Hazmat operator here. It is unwise to attach an oxygen generator or oxygen candle to any kind of respirator. The Navy and Air Force have learned the hard way decades ago. A better idea is to properly train people on how to use their respirators." So in other words, just do the normal thing correctly and you won't need new gadgets and gimmicks. So, what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that these guys' efforts are most likely not going to be received by any sort of popular industry. They probably haven't done as much research into the current nature of the industry that they're trying to get involved with as they like to think. A little bit of research would have demonstrated that the military has definitely been on the trail of such technology for as long as we can remember, because they have fighter pilots in space. They want to go higher up in their airplanes. They want to reduce the cost of oxygen capacity on planes or the ventilation system, not even for health, but for functional purposes. And there's real limitations to putting an air supply on an outside generator. So I hope these guys can do it. If they can somehow master a membrane and put a substrate through it and extract oxygen from that, there could be extreme implications for it, but that wouldn't qualify as a better N95 mask. That would qualify as an advanced breathing system, which would probably have more than just hospital room implications. As far as medical innovations go that you can build on, there's 10 from 2019 that I really wanted to use as medical innovations that demonstrate the current state of the industry. So there's a top 10, and so we start at 10 and go to 1. The first one is smart inhalers, and we talked last week about the smart devices economy, a trillion sensors economy as it's been coined by some. And it is whatever you can use, put a sensor to it, and you suddenly have a marketable device, a cutting-edge marketable device. Well, inhalers, let's say for asthmatics or people with respiration problems, not corona respiration problems, but normal ones, now you put a sensor in it, and it can monitor when you take your medicine, how much is being administered, perhaps how efficient your inhalation is or your per unit administration is. So are you breathing into it right? Like I said, are you putting proper space in between? Because if you use your inhaler properly, it's a steroid. Even though you take it and it makes you feel better immediately, it is a long-term steroid. So if you use it at a properly spaced interval based on the half-life of the medicine, you'll be in a much better situation. You probably use it less, so it's a little bit not as difficult on your system, and you'll have less instances of needing to use it. So smart technology could definitely assist in that, assist the doctors. Now, there is a danger that I wanted to mention, which is, what if your insurance company gets their hands on your usage? What if they see that, oh, you haven't been timing your dosages appropriately, so therefore we identify that you are an increased risk patient? Well, suddenly you're paying more money every month because you've been put into a different pool of risk. So do you really want people to monitor your the specifics of your medicine use? I'm not so sure. Now, it could be, on the other hand, an incentive to get a cheaper rate if you do use your medicine properly. So it could kind of go both ways. The ninth technology for Tech Tuesday that I want to focus on is robotic surgery. We've talked about this, again, these last couple of weeks. But now, since we're talking about medicine, robotic surgery is in a situation where we've never been before. Now the question is, do we actually still want human beings involved in the process? I would argue yes. You're still going to need a sentient mind at the helm of all these different capabilities. But now one surgeon could potentially do much more precise and use things like artificial intelligence and the precision of lasers, and for instance, to know exactly how deep you're cutting. Maybe it's a combination of manual and automated processes. Maybe the automated process just takes place for a few seconds, and the surgeon has to position the device, and then the automated process can kick in, and then you take the device away. So, the line between where the conscious mind ends and the machine begins becomes blurred, but it still should. That relationship will still no doubt exist, especially with something like precision surgery. You want somebody to blame if something goes wrong. The eighth one is wireless brain sensors. Again, we've talked about this. They can put it in your brain. Now they're talking about plastics that can dissolve back into your blood system. Like a plastic hybrid. So there's your materials development. And then you also have your purpose. So you have a sensor probably already as it normally is, but the real advancement is this dissolving technology that can take place. And hopefully the sensors and the uses for the sensors are going to be improving at a steady rate as well. Probably the one technology that I was most interested in on this list as far as business ideas that I might want to participate in is 3D printing in medicine. Now they're able to custom fit your prosthetics based on your the form of your extremity. Where is your bone located? How can you find the best stability on this device? But not just with limbs and additional extremities, but also with medicine. They can now print your pills with all of the different medicines you need mixed into one pill based on what time of day you're going to take it. So you're going to be taking 3 medicines every morning, 2 in the afternoon, and 3 again in the evening. Well, you would have pills that represent each one of those that your doctor perhaps, or perhaps your pharmacy, can manufacture for you with a machine. Maybe the machine has dozens and dozens of different medicines that are licensed somehow between the pharmaceutical company and the machine provider. That would be a complicated negotiation, no doubt. But they would have the raw ingredients of the pill in some sort of different containers, perhaps maybe not the most advanced ingredients or the most cutting-edge pills, because let's call it just for genetics. Let's not get into the licensing and the who owns what, but let's just with generic medicines. You have all the generic components available to the machine, and it makes individual pills. So that's a very interesting one. And then there's a third final application that's really taking shape, which is artificial organs. They can now print new blood vessels. They can print synthetic ovaries. They can even a new pancreas to help you where you might not have found a appropriate donor before. Maybe now, even soon, livers could be replaced through manipulated cells. Take a plant cell and manipulate it through our capabilities into more of an animal cell or more of a... stem cells, of course, are already doing this. And now with stem cells, with artificial intelligence, now we can direct stem cells where they need to be more precisely. That would be a little bit different than 3D printing, but it's sort of in the same industry, of course. The fifth innovation is health wearables. We've talked about this. Your Apple Watch is a classic example because it can know so many things about the way that how healthy you are. Precision medicine, again, with technologies like CRISPR and the different understandings that we have about how genetics are working and the way we're able to map them out. Now we can look at your genetics and more precisely tune the medical regimen or the medicine regimen that you're going to receive based on who you are very, very specifically. And it makes a difference in terms of specific ingredients or dosages, etc. Virtual reality can be used for students. Telehealth is going to be where you can talk to your doctor on webcam, or you can deal with any number of professionals on webcam. But for health, your doctor, your nurse, your pharmacist, you can deal with them over a screen, which is the obvious result that you would expect from a situation like we're in now with coronavirus. But they're expecting by 2025 that this is going to be a $100 billion industry. So this is a deeply disrupting technology in the way we do things. We'll talk about how to get involved with that in a second. But then the final number one advancement that we made last year was in CRISPR. Clustered regulatory interspaced short palindromic repeats. And this is the most advanced gene editing technology yet. It works by harnessing the natural mechanisms of the immune systems of bacterium cells, of invading viruses, which is then able to cut out infected DNA strands. That is just for fighting with, for instance, bacterias or viruses, but imagine if you could use the same technology to determine the characteristics of your children, or if people around you, specifically very wealthy people, are selecting their children's genetics precisely. And so you have this elite group of designer babies being born, and the fear is that the rest of babies won't be able to compete. Well, I doubt you're going to get such an advanced person just from this practice on the first generation. But imagine if you, for 5 or 6 generations in a row, are constantly refining these genetics. Well, you might end up with an extremely intelligent lineage, offspring, at least the best that you could possibly produce. Now, occasionally you find people in the public who are obviously the best that their parents could have produced in terms of the jackpot, or in terms of, the way that they look, or the way that, or how smart they are. It already exists, so you just have more of those. It's not like you would get some new freak race of people. So I don't think it's something to be feared. I think it's something to be excited about, and I think we could make ourselves as a human race much stronger and more able to, fight against disease, have stronger immune systems, and more intelligent. And hopefully more kind to each other as well. So smart that we can transcend into a better society. That is something that this maybe promises. So that's enough for technology today. There's a lot of implications for the technology that we just mentioned. The one that I like the most, of course, is 3D printing. I think there's all sorts of opportunities there, not just with medical, but making advanced, even like super appendages, combining humans with robots. If you could 3D print the ligaments and joints where your hands and feet match, personalize larger macrostructures that you can control, this would be a wonderful business model. So let's step away from Tech Tuesday now. Let's go into our Strategy Now session where we're going to talk about Theranos in terms of how it could have been done properly. So we'll be right back. Okay, so in the spirit of us talking about Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos, I want to, for Business Strategies Now, I want to talk about how we could have done her project better. But first, we need to discuss more about what she did. So I want to jump into the Profiles and Success section first, so we'll do that now. Welcome, this is Profiles and Success. And today we're talking about Elizabeth Holmes. And her story is amazing because she got started when she was so young. In 2004, she had $6 million of venture capital funding. And at this point, she was still very young, like 19. And by 2010, so 6 years later, she had $92 million of funding. She's 25 years old at this point. In 2014, she had $400 million of venture funding and a $9 billion valuation. So this would have been on the back of a lot of lies. She would have been about 29 years old. I can't imagine having that responsibility at that age, but she did. And she just kept on upping the ante. For those of you that don't know, Elizabeth Holmes started Theranos. Theranos was an organization that promised to be able to take a tiny little bit of blood in a device that they had created or supposedly created, and it was supposed to give you results on all different types of blood tests at one time with a very small amount of blood. Like somehow the technology had advanced under everybody's nose to the point where just a few drops could tell you anything. Well, it turns out that this is not really possible. And the real interest in her story was the initial steps that she took. And I think these are steps that anybody can take. There's some really profound lessons in studying a crime. You can really learn how things really actually work, or the crime would have never worked in the first place. So she was at Stanford, and her boyfriend was this man named Mr. Balwani, and he had been a student at Berkeley. She had been a high school senior when she had met him when he was at Berkeley, and they had begun some sort of relationship. It's unclear how deep things had gone. But then she went to Stanford, and she started to have this idea. She started to shop an idea around to her professors. And there's such an interesting principle for business founders in this action. Before she started looking for money, before she started looking even for partners, well, she already had Mr. Balwani, but that doesn't really count in terms of what I'm trying to say. She wasn't looking for help from the traditional startup community. She started looking at academics. It's a fascinating idea because academics oftentimes have connections to the business world. The business world is always curious what academics think about ideas. She went to all of her science professors, biology, chemistry, and they said to her, no, there's no way that this is going to work. You're barking up the wrong tree. Try something else. But she went to her other professors. She went to her engineering or unengineering professor named Channing Robertson. Channing Robertson was in the School of Engineering at Stanford, so he's already a very successful person. And he was actually the first board member on Theranos. So he championed her idea. She went to him, she said, I have an idea, and of course the engineering department is not going to look at the medical truths of this in the same way that they're going to look at the engineering truths. We realized from the story of the engineers who want to work on the N95 mask, also Stanford engineers, by the way, engineers don't see the truth in the same way that medical people will see the truth. They will see what could be. Well, this device might be able to do this. They're not thinking medically, is it possible to do this? They only think about the capabilities of the device because their field is going to be their first filter of judgment. So engineering was much more hot about the idea than medical. That's what we need to move forward on. So they launched it. This Channing Robertson was able to introduce Elizabeth Holmes to all sorts of venture capital people. Because this is Stanford. Stanford is close to Silicon Valley, and an engineering elite leader is going to be a voice that is going to be very closely listened to by the people who are trying to make money off the same field. So in 2003, he joined the board. By 2004, they had $6 million in funding. The point I want to point out is because in the medical field, progress happens slow. From the moment that she got that $6 million of funding, she was able to take a paycheck. For the next 10 years, she was able to take a paycheck from her venture that she was part of, that she was leading, that she was, fraudulently representing. She was able to take 10 years of paycheck, 10 years of income, based on a product that could never work. She was able to raise more money. Now, obviously, she was lying along the way. But there's still a lesson here for people who just want to do a legitimate thing. You're going to be able to live off the development of this project for a long time. And she could have too. The real thing that was very strange to me was in 2014, even though they knew that this wasn't working, they had to know by now, we're not going to be able to make this work. They've been working on it for 10 years. In 2014, this is where the rubber really met the road, where it was like, okay, now we're really committing to a crime. We're really committing to a crime. Because they made an agreement with Walgreens, the pharmacy chain, to administer their tests in the chain. So people are coming in from real life, citizens are coming into Walgreens all over the country, having their blood tested. Wow, that was easy. Now I go home. Hey, you don't have any problems. Well, maybe they do. Hey, you do have problems. Well, maybe they don't. There was all sorts of false results one way or another. And it was almost like they were just choosing at random what to say in these tests. Well, these are life or death results. And sometimes they would take the test and put it through a proper machine, just for people who were scrutinizing the business. Maybe a bunch of executives from an investment firm come to the company. Hey, sit right here. We'll take your blood. Oh, we got to go over here into the secret room for a minute. We'll be right back. It's not 100% transparent. This is the magic trick. Hey, why don't you guys come over here? Why don't you look at our a lounge? Let's have some coffee. Oh, your tests are ready, from our machine. Well, what they didn't know is that there's actually a proper machine, old school machine, in the back room where they can test properly. And so they got proper results. So, there's a lesson there in how to lie to people. There's a lesson here in how to con your way to 10 years of income. And respect. This woman was a celebrity. By the time the house of cards came crashing down, the investors who were meeting with her about her project were starstruck. She had become a bigger name than any of them. She was on TV. She was the darling of the liberal media. She was everything that social justice warriors were hoping to find, a young, ambitious woman who had changed everything. Now, it cast a shadow over all the other young, ambitious entrepreneurs who actually deserved that recognition, man and woman, and from many countries. So sometimes when you get what you want, you actually, overshadow a lot of people who deserve it more. And they even made agreements with Blue Cross and AmeriHealth. These are major players in the medical industry. I can't believe they were willing to take it that far. At any point between 2004 and 2014, they could have said, you know what? It's not going to work. Our tests are becoming more sporadic, slowly step away from the promises they've made, and you don't go to prison. Maybe you start a new venture. There's no shame in failing necessarily. The shame is in the lies. The shame is getting caught in the lies. She will never get funding for another project again. And just another note. Recently, she married I don't know how rich they are, but I think they're trust fund level heirs to a small hotel fortune. His name is Bobby Evans. And the whole world is shocked that she was able to pull off such a, with her reputation, that anybody who's wealthy would welcome them into her life. But from what I understand, this man is a very similar personality, so maybe it's written in the stars. Finally, though, John Carreyrou reported, and he followed her, and he caught her, and he tore down the entire facade that her and Balwani had been creating. Now she's about to go on trial later on this year, assuming coronavirus doesn't delay it, which it might. But she's looking at probably some years in prison. Probably, she could get up to 20, and I don't see why she would receive an entry level, because this is a nationwide scandal. So anyways, that's profiles in infamy, I would say, and the reason you want to discuss it is just because there's tremendous lessons in how to initially get started. You have your idea, you have your business plan, you've done some development on it, but even before that, or even in the same time, just go find an academic. They are purely minded in terms of the industry. They're going to look at your idea and say, wow, my industry. They're not necessarily going to say money first. They might, but you're dealing with a purity of purpose when you're dealing with the academic community, usually. I mean, they want glory, they want recognition, but they want to contribute. So, and they can introduce you to other faculty. They're the most approachable. It's much easier to approach a university professor with your idea than a venture capital boss. One of them is going to be warm and interested on a personal level, and might be willing to take you under their wing. Venture capital firms will only take you under their wing if you're going to help them grow too. So they wouldn't want to be your first contact. But so many just approach venture capital firms directly. The lesson in this is manageable step by manageable step. So just put in one extra person in there and they can carry you much further. That is. So, okay, so now we're going to do strategy now that we've done it a little bit out of order. So we'll be right back. Okay, for strategy now, I want to talk about some startups who are actually doing the development process correctly. Most young entrepreneurs have decided it's not a good idea to depend on lies and deceit in order to build their company. They would like to have a company that lasts into the future with respect and functionality without the inevitable legal headaches that are going to come when you try to deceive the public. I honestly cannot believe that an organization such as Theranos could have thought they could get away with it for very much longer than they did. It's like psychopath behavior. But there is no shortage of medical startups that are actually, maybe they're not going to change the world or disrupt an entire industry, but they are trying to participate on a $1 million level and not a $1 billion level, which is much more wonderful than the lives that most people are living. So why not? It doesn't have to be an epic shift. There's Tango Belt, for instance. Tango Belt is a belt that's wearable for people who have, for instance, fragile hips, or perhaps they have a recent hip injury. We do know that elderly people, when they receive hip injuries, it's usually a very ominous sign about the lifespan that they have before them. A broken hip can spell the end of someone's life quite often. It has such an effect on your metaphysical reality, and just, I think probably your emotional outlook towards life too. It's debilitating. It'll put you in that chair probably for the rest of your life. The Tango Belt is something that can protect against this. They received $2.5 million of funding in 2019, and there's a lot of promise around the product that they're developing. I highly recommend you look into it if you know somebody who needs a little bit more protection than normal. Emulate Therapeutics is another one. They received $200,000 of development of funding. They are the developers of radio-frequency-based devices for treatments of cancer. So this $200,000 is probably almost exclusively for testing. They're able to contract with owners of larger machines. They're able to do some basic prototyping. They're able to have some money for legal. They're able to have a little bit of money, perhaps, for marketing. But I'm guessing with this amount of funding, they're not at marketing yet. They're just trying to get the prototype off the ground. This would definitely be early stage funding. Access 360. Also in 2019, they received $150,000 of funding. They are a provider of orthopedic and spinal medical products. It's not hard to understand why they want to do it and what types of products there might be. We're talking about lumbar support, maybe back braces, maybe some, with $150,000 of funding, they're probably not even electrical devices. They're probably mostly supports of different sorts. So they'll be in their prototyping stage as well. With $150,000, they'll be able to establish their basic legal. They probably had that established before they got funding, or they wouldn't have gotten it. But probably funding, the development stage, the prototyping, testing, this sort of thing. Otological Technologies, they have undisclosed funding. Again, they're 2019. Developer of AI-enabled diagnostic device for detecting ear diseases. So they have picked a very specific problem to address. But if they can solve the problem, you're looking at $1 billion. It's almost like this with any medical truth. Now, obviously, some of these were very early stage, so we're looking at 10 years of development in front of us. Think about what that founder is experiencing. Probably not with early stage, $150,000, $200,000 of funding. You're probably not taking a regular paycheck out of this, but they're one step closer. If they can do anything successful with it, another series of funding can follow, maybe from the same people. Maybe those same people would know more advanced investors. So it's like the more people you can bring in on this project, the more people they're going to know. Word of mouth is a big deal when it comes to funding because you're not going to advertise. The people who are offering you funding may wish to keep your idea a secret as much as possible. So there's this as well. Word of mouth matters. So I just want to point out that these are just some examples of medical innovations that don't have to be billion-dollar innovations. You don't need $1 billion to be happy in the world. And there's a lot of happiness that comes from developing one of these kind of projects and seeing them work. Knowing that you're helping people live better lives is just as rewarding as the money, I'm sure. I suppose it depends on where you are in life right now, but people want to be appreciated by the world that they live in. So that's strategy now, just some examples of other people's strategies that are being used. I think the basic framework of it is determine a problem, understand how the problem is currently being solved, and try to brainstorm around new ways to address that same problem, maybe by using the same indicators, same markers, in a new way. So good luck. All right, now we are to my favorite section, which is business supermodels. This is where we're going to take a business idea and break it down. Today we're focusing on the medical industry, and before we get started, there's really 3 different kinds of businesses that you can make in the medical industry. That is developing a medicine, or developing a device, or developing a service, like a healthcare provider, a home where you go to live, or some sort of service where the nurse comes to the house and visits. Those are kind of businesses that are services. Before we get started into the basic breakdown, which is generally consistent, educate, establish, develop, and then, market, deliver, and follow up. But with the medical industry, it's a little bit different than other businesses, so there's a few preliminary details that you might want to mention. Research, market, niche. So in the medical industry, there is literally thousands of ways that the body can be served. Tests, solutions, cures, support. And so you want to make sure that you research your niche, how are services currently being provided. It's sort of like a competitive analysis and a customer analysis at the same time. But it's not as competitive because there's always only going to be the best treatment, and so most doctors are going to pick that. So it's not about beating out your competition based on opinion. It's about being the best solution. So you really got to focus on the mission much more than the image of the company. And that's also true for websites and social media. These sort of companies are often known to do what's called going dark. So They'll have a website, but it won't be terribly informative, and it won't be there to market their product. That's not their primary intention. And remember, this is mostly business to business, so the marketing takes place much more face-to-face. So the second principle of a medical business that's a little bit more specific than general business models is the necessity to network. So you just need to network. It's actually a basic principle of business-to-business marketing, but in this instance, it just needs to be reset again because they're not going to find out about your product in the traditional way. So aside from finding the right doctors to support you and doing your networking properly, you want to choose the right investor. So there's a lot of guys who will have a lot of money and think your idea is great and let's throw some money at it, but can they help you network? Do they have any sort of expertise? Do they have an understanding of how long this is going to take? Are they going to give you breathing room as a founder to develop your idea properly, or are they going to crunch down and try to get you to turn out a product as soon as possible, which, by the way, could land you in jail. So you really got to be careful about that. If it doesn't work, you be careful about your claims. Look at what Theranos did. It's a classic example. So there's another truth, which is the medical responsibility of your company. So doctors are required to take a Hippocratic oath, which says that I will provide medical service to whoever needs it at any time, which is why if you see somebody having a heart attack on the hospital, you're always going to see if there's a doctor available, they feel obligated to jump in and handle it because they've taken this oath. And who wants to watch somebody die when you know how to solve it? But the point is, as a medical providing company, doctors and people you work with are going to expect you to sort of honor the same sorts of commitment, because you're a health provider, but nobody wants to deal with an unethical health provider. So you have to buy into the mission of the industry, or at least be perceived to. And so you're going to have poor customers, you're going to have rural customers, you're going to want to think of a strategy to demonstrate that you're attempting to care for them as much as the moneyed customers that actually help you build your company. It's just an added requirement because you're dealing with health. So, and then the final point, which is more relevant, it's relevant to any industry, but it's especially relevant here, which is knowing your limitations. You might think you're setting out to cure cancer, but you might only come up with a good treatment for cancer. A classic example is these engineers from Stanford who we were just talking about who came up with a solution for an N95 mask, or at least they think they did. Well, they don't necessarily understand their limitations, because if you think that nuclear fission is going to be invented and implemented on behalf of an N95 mask, you truly don't understand that parallel industry, because there's a lot of people waiting for it. The entire hydrogen-based economy is just waiting for a proper fission process to take place. So, obviously these guys have jumped into very deep water. That's not to say that their second solution won't yield results, or even, who knows? Maybe one night in the garage they stumble across the answer. I dare say if they invent nuclear fission in their garage one evening, they might not live to tell about it, but who knows? So let's jump into the breakdown. If you're going to create a medical device or a medicine business, you want to educate yourself about customers and competitors, of course. You want to know who's doing it and who's receiving it. Probably you're going to want to also focus on the nature of the industry. So with medicine, of course, there's a lot of research and information that needs to be learned. It's a very information-intensive business. And so you're going to want to educate yourself about practices, about the health systems that you're attempting to affect, how the body works. So you might want to be somewhat of a competent scientist on some level, science student on some level. And then you want to also know the people who you might want to be networking to. So, who are the doctors that you might, make your initial pitch to. Maybe just focus on a specific state. Like, I'm going to focus on all of the doctors in Illinois. And when I get to the end of that rotation, I'm just going to start over and I'm going to keep on hammering home on one state. Obviously, you would like to reach out to every doctor possible, but it's a little bit more manageable if you sequester your efforts. So beyond that, you want to establish yourself. So you're probably going to want to have a good lawyer for this, because you're making a long-term research project, and there's going to be a lot of information you want to protect. You're going to want to document your progress as you make it with time-stamped information. This is the way that you can, prove that, your research, just in case at the time of when you unveil your product or service, you don't have somebody else coming up and saying, I did that first, I have the rights to this first. You can demonstrate your research, demonstrate where you got it from, demonstrate that you didn't steal it from them, and when, and what you did and when. In the development process, time stamping is important. So beyond that, in the medical industry, your website is not going to be as important, but you still want to have one. It could just say, we're doing this is who we are as a company. It doesn't have to necessarily be so detailed. The finer points of your research obviously are confidential, usually. And, your social media to some extent, at least have a way to be contacted as a company or as a leader. Probably your identity as a leader is important because you're dealing with long-term funding. So it might help to develop your personal brand a little bit more than other devices, perhaps, because you're going to be in a relationship with these investors for probably some years. And that's a good thing. That's what you want. That's what you go into it expecting. This is truly a swing-for-the-fence industry, so there's going to be a lot of strikeouts, and those strikeouts might take years to develop as well. It's just painful that way. But, you're dealing with intelligent individuals who are monitoring the results every step of the way. So unless your team is defunct, you might have opportunities to pivot. So then, beyond establishing your identity in the traditional ways and the business-to-business ways, which is building your face-to-face contact list, you want to, you have your educate, you have your establish, and then you have your product development. So, you're going to want to do your research. Maybe you got some funding. Maybe you saved up some funding. You're going to want to end up in a lab. You're going to either a laboratory to develop your chemical mixtures with somebody who understands how to actually do that. It might be you, it might not be. Or your device, which is much more at home. Your device, it's in essence a box that does something. So when you're prototyping, it doesn't have to be so sleek and sharp. It just has to be assembled and demonstrate that it can be assembled. And then from there, the product design people will come in later. So you have to be able to show your components. Understanding how to do technical drawings would be a big plus. Or understanding that you're going to need technical drawings to show to investors, to show to manufacturers. It's just part of a business plan in this field is your specifications, your technical specifications. If you're doing a service industry, your product development is more like developing your processes, the workflow of your staff, understanding who has what responsibilities. You're going to have, your location is obviously very important. You're going to want to get state licensing and all of this. So you're going to definitely want a good lawyer. I would say in anything where you're developing something new, and you're any new business, getting a lawyer is a big deal. I know it's expensive for the young founder, and it's not necessarily your very first step, but about the time you're really going to want to start unveiling yourself to the world, the general public, you want to make sure you have a lawyer before you sign contracts, before you make any kind of commitment. Because even though the contract is read a certain way, just filing the contract in a way can affect the way that it is enforced. So, having a lawyer that understands that is, you can't put a price on good legal advice. So then beyond that, you want to market your product. So you've developed your device or you developed your medicine. You're probably going to want to, you could go, once you have your manufacturer, you're probably going to want to contact a distributor or something like this. I really don't recommend just manufacturing it and selling it directly to the public. There's going to be licensing considerations that could be extremely expensive. So once you get let's say a medicine first. Once you have your medicine developed and somewhat tested, this is about the time you might want to start contacting a proper pharmaceuticals company who can buy it from you and then market it properly, just because you don't want to be alone with this, because it's health. If somebody dies on your watch, that's the end of your money. Whereas the pharmaceuticals company understands how to fight that. Unfortunately, you have to fight it because, you have to defend yourself. You didn't do this on purpose. And there are going to be people who have adverse side effects to your medicine. And it's like this with the devices, too. Suppose you put a pacemaker in somebody's chest and then it stops working for some reason. Well, you're going to be liable. The family's going to come after you and sue. So you come up with an idea for a medical device. You want to prototype it. And then probably you want to start contacting companies. It's just like being a rock star. You want to get signed by a record label, or if it's just like being a video game developer, you're not going to pay for all the development yourself. You're not going to develop it all alone in your bedroom unless you're truly skilled or unless it's a very simple game. You're going to want to develop your concept, document your concept, make some traction in terms of getting some market research and things like that, and then you're going to want to pitch it. It's going to be a business-to-business transaction because you're going to need a larger company, again, that has protections and understanding and distribution and everything, because your device might be obsolete if you do it yourself by the time you get it to market. So you're trying to prepare your presentation for big-time players. So it's a business-to-business. And then beyond that, you want to deliver your product. So if you're a medicine, you want to make sure that it's in pharmacies everywhere. This is where a big company can handle it. If you want to make a device, you want to make sure it's, of course, available on your own online store. If it's authorized by the FDA, then you're going to be able to sell it too. So you're going to, or unless you made an agreement otherwise, but you're going to want to make sure it's on store shelves. You're going to want to make sure it's available online. You're going to want to make sure doctors have understanding about how to use it. So you, as an evangelist for your brand, especially after it's been adopted by a larger company, can do a lot to help it work because you are the founder. And you can go out and meet face-to-face, and you can convey your sincerity in a way that a company never could. Okay, so finally, then there's deliver the product, like I said, which is pharmacy shelves or online, or if it's a service, you have your facility. And then I skipped marketing. So right before you deliver your product, you want to market it. So this would be up to the larger company that distributes it, of course. They would have the advertising budget, national budget. They would have an army of salespeople and professionals who are paid on commission to go out and promote your product. And probably in the end of the day, you'll end up getting a few percents on every sale. But if you're dealing with billions of dollars, that's money you're going to be more than happy to have. And then, so then you deliver your product, like I said, and that's, store shelves or the mail, or, they come into your facility, which is obviously the most expensive, is to have a facility and administer a service. That's because you have staff, and it's just all sorts of regulations as well. Going to need a good lawyer for that too. And then the final step is customer service. So you want to make sure that this is working. It continues to work. You don't, like, for instance, there's people who had a sling put in their, like, a stomach. It's like a mesh netting that holds their stomach in place after they've had a certain type of injury. Well, that causes tremendous irritation, and then they got to go in and take it out. Well, they're going to sue you for that money because you provided them with a device that didn't work as intended. Well, there's no way you can get around that to a certain extent, and it's always going to happen, and there will be lawsuits. You just have to prepare for that. This is another reason you want a major company behind you. They have vicious lawyers, and they have lobbyists in Washington, and the list goes on. But, you want to make sure that it works. You want to make sure that customers are happy. You want to make sure that the doctors who are prescribing it are happy as well. In fact, they're probably more important because customers will do whatever doctors say. So the doctors, the business-to-business transaction satisfaction is your primary goal. You want to make sure that doctors are happy and continue to prescribe your device or your medicine or refer you to facilities. I hope that serves to clarify a few things about the medical industry. I wish Elizabeth Holmes could watch my presentation, and maybe she wouldn't. Maybe she could have better success next time. I'm thinking of starting it myself. I would love to demonstrate the setup of such a project. In the next couple of weeks, we might include new sections. I want to do a walkthrough of a business for remote workforces coming up soon. And I just thank you for watching. I thank you for participating in my community. We're doing everything we can to improve our quality and your viewer satisfaction, and hopefully it's just something useful for you in your progression. If I can be part of that progression, it's the most fulfilling thing I can think of. So just thank you so much. I appreciate you. Have a great day.